A billionaire's marriage crumbles under the weight of pressure and distance. In his isolation, he meets a charming woman who seems to understand him completely. She integrates herself into his life with calculated grace, positioning herself as indispensable. No one suspects her. Not his friends, who see only kindness. Not his children, who sense something wrong but lack the language to explain it. Not even the household staff, who notice inconsistencies but remain silent, bound by professional discretion. Only one woman, the maid who once held the family together, catches a detail so small, so easily missed, that following it leads her to uncover a conspiracy of terrifying proportions. What she discovers isn't manipulation or deception, it's a plan to eliminate an entire family, and when she realizes the danger, she has only hours to prevent a tragedy that would have looked like an accident. Richard Coleman existed in perpetual tension between two worlds that demanded everything from him. By day, he navigated the complex machinery of corporate power, meetings, decisions, the weight of shareholder expectations. By night, he returned to a home where his marriage was quietly disintegrating, where the silence between him and his wife Emily grew heavier with each passing week. Emily tried to hold the household together. She attempted conversations, sought reconciliation, reached for connection, but Richard moved through the mansion like a man drowning, exhausted, unable to offer what she needed. The arguments came more frequently, sharper, and eventually inevitable. The divorce came almost as a relief, an ending to a pain that had become unbearable. Emily moved to a small house on the outskirts of the city, refusing Richard's money, choosing instead to rebuild on her own terms. Their twin sons, Noah and Ethan, remained with Richard in the mansion under the care of Grace Miller, the housemaid who had worked for the family for years and understood the boys with an intuition born of constant presence. Richard threw himself into work, believing that distance and distraction would heal what he refused to confront emotionally. Then Megan Hart appeared at a business event. She was elegant, attentive, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to say exactly what Richard needed to hear. She complimented his intelligence, praised his dedication, and made him feel noticed in a way that had been absent for years. She listened with a focus that felt rare and precious. Within weeks, Richard had convinced himself that meeting her was the universe offering him a second chance. He invited her into his home, into his life, eventually into his future. Megan's integration into the household was masterfully subtle. She arrived with gifts, greeted the staff warmly, and presented herself as someone genuinely eager to help. But Grace, the maid who had observed family dynamics for years, noticed the subtle shifts in her behavior when Richard was absent. Megan's tone toward Noah and Ethan changed when she thought no one was watching. Her warmth became coldness. Her interest became irritation. Grace saw how Megan rearranged the house according to her preferences, how she questioned routines that had worked for years, how she positioned herself as essential to Richard's function. But Grace also understood her position. She kept her observations private and continued her work, protecting the twins as best she could from the tension slowly spreading through the mansion. Megan's strategy was almost genius in its simplicity. She systematically created small accusations against Grace, minor claims of carelessness, suggestions of inappropriate behavior, insinuations of incompetence. Each accusation came wrapped in concern, delivered to an emotionally exhausted Richard who was too tired to investigate thoroughly. The accusations accumulated. The doubt grew. Richard, torn between the woman who had served his family loyally and the woman promising him stability, eventually made a decision born of exhaustion. He dismissed Grace. Grace left the mansion carrying a burden of injustice, uncertain of how her years of dedication had been erased so completely. She moved temporarily into Emily's small house. The two women, each carrying their own wounds from the mansion, found solace in each other's company and in the knowledge that they still cared deeply for Noah and Ethan. Meanwhile, Megan's presence in the mansion expanded exponentially. With Grace gone, she controlled the household almost entirely. She managed schedules, made decisions, and positioned herself as the only person Richard could truly depend on. She moved through the mansion like someone who had always belonged there, and Richard, still emotionally fragile, accepted her authority without question. But Megan's ambitions extended far beyond social control. One quiet afternoon, Grace returned to the mansion to collect personal belongings left behind during her sudden departure. She moved carefully through familiar hallways, each step carrying the weight of memory. As she passed Richard's office, she noticed his laptop still open on the desk. Unusual, careless, as if someone had walked away in a hurry. Grace hesitated. Every instinct told her to maintain professional boundaries, to gather her things and leave. But something deeper, an instinct forged through years of caring for this family, made her stop. She approached the desk slowly and looked at the screen. The emails were visible, still logged in, conversation threads still open. At first, the words didn't make sense. Then they did, with a clarity that made her stomach drop. The messages outlined a plan, not a vague threat or abstract anger, but specific steps. They described how to sabotage the car's brake system. They calculated timing. They discussed the inheritance and the financial benefits that would accrue from Richard and the twins' deaths. The tone was casual, almost conversational about murder. Grace read the same passages repeatedly, hoping she had misunderstood, but the meaning was unmistakable, written by someone confident enough not to hide their intentions. Every detail was there, the method, the motivation, the timeline. She felt physically ill. Her hands shook as she realized what Megan had actually been doing, not just manipulating her way into the family, but planning their elimination. Grace didn't hesitate after that moment of paralysis. She left the mansion immediately, her mind racing with one singular purpose. She had to warn Richard before he drove the twins anywhere. She ran through the city streets, her lungs burning, her heart hammering with urgency. Every second felt precious, every delay a potential tragedy. She kept thinking of Noah and Ethan, of their small faces, of how close they were to danger they didn't understand. The next morning, Richard prepared the twins for school, following the routine he'd maintained for years. He checked their backpacks, adjusted their seatbelts, made sure everything was in order. It was a simple, ordinary morning, the kind that happened hundreds of times without incident. As he prepared to back the car out of the driveway, Grace appeared running toward him, screaming for him to stop. Richard stepped out confused as Grace explained breathlessly about the messages, the plan, the sabotage brakes. He didn't want to believe her, but he checked the pedal. It fell to the floor with no resistance, offering no pressure. The brake lines had been cut. He stood staring at the car, the reality crashing over him. Minutes earlier, he had nearly driven his children to school in a vehicle designed to fail catastrophically. The twins would have died thinking it was an accident. The authorities arrived within the hour. They examined the vehicle, confirmed the deliberate sabotage, and discovered the emails on Megan's laptop still sitting openly on Richard's desk. The messages were undeniable, a complete record of premeditation, financial motivation, and intent to commit murder. Megan was arrested without resistance, her carefully constructed persona finally irrelevant. Emily arrived as the investigation unfolded. She moved immediately toward Richard and the twins, her maternal instinct overriding months of anger and distance. When the boys saw her, they ran to her with a desperation that spoke volumes about their emotional state. Grace stood nearby, and the twins embraced her with equal intensity, tears streaming down their faces. They told their mother how Grace had saved them, how she had appeared moments before tragedy, how she had warned their father in time. Emily looked at Grace with a gratitude that transcended words. She understood that this woman, the one Richard had unjustly dismissed, had been the only person paying attention to the real danger threatening the family. As the investigation continued, the pieces became horrifyingly clear. Megan had spent months positioning herself as essential while systematically isolating anyone who might interfere with her plan. She had created accusations against Grace specifically to remove the one person who noticed her inconsistencies. She had manipulated a grieving, exhausted man into complete dependence, and she had nearly succeeded in murdering his children. That evening, after the authorities had finished and the initial shock had begun to settle, Richard, Emily, the twins and Grace gathered inside the quiet mansion. The children stayed close to their mother and to Grace, unwilling to let either of them out of their sight. Richard sat with Emily, a conversation that should have been impossible weeks earlier now feeling natural and necessary. They discussed what had happened, how they had each seen pieces of the truth without understanding the whole. They talked about the danger they had narrowly escaped and the woman who had made the difference. Grace sat with the twins, holding them, reassuring them that they were safe. She didn't speak about her own injustice or the pain of dismissal. She simply remained present, offering the consistency and protection that had always defined her role. As the night deepened, the weight of what almost happened settled into everyone's consciousness. They had survived something that should have destroyed them. A family had been restored to each other, Richard and Emily finding the possibility of reconciliation, the twins understanding that both parents loved them, and Grace finally being seen for the loyalty and bravery she had demonstrated. The morning had begun with an ordinary routine. It had nearly ended in tragedy. It had instead become the moment that forced everyone involved to see clearly, to understand who deserved trust, who deserved gratitude, and who deserved to be welcomed back into the fold. The mansion, which had felt suffocating and false under Megan's influence, began to feel like a home again. Not the home it had been, but perhaps a better one, built on honesty, hard-earned wisdom, and the knowledge that the people we take for granted are often the ones most worthy of our deepest appreciation.